So, the next talk is entitled Acquisition and Creation of Exhibition Copies for Slide Works. It's going to be presented by Jeffrey Warda and Doug Munson. Jeffrey is the paper conservator at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, where he is responsible for the Works on Paper and Photography collection. He was chair of the Electronic Media Group from 2006 to 2008 and chaired the Digital Photographic Documentation Task Force of AIC from 2007 to 2008. He was editor and co-author of the AIC Guide to Digital Photography and Conservation Documentation and is currently the managing editor of EMG's biennial print publication, the Electronic Media Review. Jeffrey received his MA and Certificate of Advanced Study in Art Conservation from the State University of New York College at Buffalo, New York. Doug Munson received degrees in Geophysical Sciences and the History of Science from the University of Chicago, merging those academic interests to a serious involvement in photography. In 1976, he formed the Chicago Albumin Works, a company that has molted from its original intent of producing photographic prints and authentic historic media to its present activities of digital archiving for photograph collections, manuscript collections, and collections of other forms of flat art. In addition, the Albumin Works provides a variety of specialized printing and conservation services for photographic collections. Among these unique services are the capability to recover and digitize the image pellicles from deteriorated acetate negatives and the ability to produce continuous tone archival silver halide film negatives and transparencies from high-resolution digital files. The Albumin Works relocated to Western Massachusetts in 1982, and in 2009 opened a satellite studio in New York City and associated with the Better Image Conservation Studios. So, Doug, Jeffrey, please. And somebody who knows.
Thank you, Paul.
Great.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here. So, Doug and I have been working together for about 2 years now on a couple projects with the Guggenheim's collection, and that's involved digitizing and creating new exhibition copies of some collection works in the Guggenheim's collection. Doug's going to focus more on sort of the technical aspects of making these exhibition copies, and I'm going to talk more along the lines of what Kate spoke about, our acquisition process and how we handle these materials. I wanted to just start just by saying a line that Jeff mentioned earlier and Kate alluded to also, how we're striving to make the best exhibition quality slides possible. We want them to match the originals as best we can, but we always have to remember it's totally impossible to make these things identical. You always have generational loss. There's always change. There's all these external factors that limit what you're able to do. And Kate had a great line, an industry beyond your control, which is kind of what it feels like sometimes. So that it can be just the equipment your lab just happens to have, the processing chemicals that day, how much money you've available to just keep pumping into this process, and how much time. All these things are factors that influence what you get back. So hopefully today and tomorrow we'll be sharing things that will help you give you tools to better create the best exhibition copies you can. So I'm going to be using works in our collection. This is a piece by Catherine Sontag from 2008 called Mitnach. It's 81 35mm slides. It's a black and white piece. This is an installation shot. So this is actually the piece here. She shot this in her studio in Berlin. You guys can hear me okay? Is this all right? Okay. And she used like her studio lab, like furniture and things in her studio, and made these compositions, in this case using a slide projector, which I thought was good for today. And she used mirrors and lights, and then she had these printouts of spirit photography, early and later spirit photography images that she could have juxtaposed. She shot this on negative film, black and white negative film, and then she bought one of those reverse processing kits. And so she processed it into positive film, so she had slides out of that. She left some of the chemicals the processing chemicals on the film, and she got these kind of ghost halos, and she said, oh, that's kind of good with the spirit photography, so she left them. And then she scanned all this film, and went into Photoshop, took out some of these. There were some that were too many, took them out, and then re-output back to film with a CRT film recorder, and Maurice showed sort of a film example of that, I think. So this is what we got. This is a sort of a typical acquisition, and they're all different. Every piece, there's different, these things are kind of spelled out differently, but this is fairly typical for what we would ask for and what we might get. So we have a reference copy. This is like the artist exhibition copy. A duplication master. In this case, it's a CD because she's producing slides from digital files of a master set, and this ideally is your camera originals. In this case, she gave us strips of film that were not mounted, and then a certificate of authenticity and installation instructions on how to put this piece together. So I'm going to go through these kind of quickly as our process of what we call deliverables. So the master set are the camera originals, and ideally we want the actual camera originals because we want the best image quality to base subsequent exhibition copies, because every generation you move away, you lose quality. If a piece is editioned, the artist probably wants to hang on to these, and we have to figure out a different way, get some other sort of deliverable that works for us. That's a dialogue. The duplication master set is something we're comfortable with giving to a photo lab and having them use this to make more copies from, or to use as a color reference set. Since we very rarely want to give original film to a lab. The reference copy set, this like identifies or defines the piece. So we'd never show this, but it's sort of like a defining representation of the piece. So some slide pieces will be like 40 slides that get duped or get duplicated to fill an 80 slide carousel. We would want all 80 in that reference copy. It can't just be the first 40. It's common now that we're getting electronic files instead or in conjunction, and these electronic files can often be the duplication master set if you're producing them from those files. Now I got this from Kate. This is that whole thing she's doing with those production diagrams is a fabulous idea, and I think it's the only way you can kind of keep track of this stuff. So it's just a visual way of what I just said before. Red, it's scary, you don't want to touch it. They're camera originals, best image quality, and the duplication master set is derived from it. Now, you could replace the duplication master set, but it's not so easy to do, so it's orange. The reference copy set is typically derived from the duplication, but it could be this. They're all different variations on this theme. But it's red because we really don't want to mess with what the artist gave us as the reference defining moment of the piece. And then we're making these exhibition copies, and they're green, and they're not considered quote unquote art in that they can be destroyed, and it's not a problem. We don't destroy them, we hang on to them. The other aspect of what we ask for are installation instructions, and a lot of really detailed questions about what we can do and what we can't do with a piece. This domain is more Joanna's domain, so I'm not going to get into this too much, but they're really just as valid points compared to everything else we'll be talking about today. What kind of projector? Does it matter? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they want you to use a certain kind of projector. What's the throw? How large can this image be? Usually it's a range. For anything we're going to show, it's hard to be confined to just one size. Timing is, what's the timing slot for each slide? Are they in sync with each other? Are they separate? If there's multiple projectors, do they have to be synced up? Is there a sound or audio component, and how does that relate to the movement of these slides? Stands. Even, some artists will be like, I don't like those stands, don't use those projector stands. They'll have an opinion about all this. And it's really important to have this dialogue with them that often is not in the installation instructions they give you. Those installation instructions are sort of a guide to, okay, now we have to ask some other questions. And then finally, it's not always just a slide projector on a wall. It could be a whole environment. It could be many other components and a whole space that has to be, included in this whole process. Okay, So when you get your material, I want to go through kind of what we do to figure out what we've got. And this is like evaluating everything. The most important thing is to do all this at once. You want to look at every component all at the same time in the same way. And the only times I haven't done it is when I've really regretted it. So use a good quality light box, 5,000 Kelvin lamps. And the things that I'm looking at with a light box are color differences between different sets of things. Because I have a uniform light surface, I'm checking color. I'm looking at brightness or exposure issues if they're different slides. And I'm looking at contrast issues. Maybe you could have a slide with a lot of contrast or one with little. Try to block out that excess light so you can really judge these things a little better. And use a good quality loupe. So here I've got Catherine Sontag's film strips, the master strips, and then the reference copy slides that she gave us. This is a Schneider Optics 10X loupe. Try to get a loupe that's glass, not a cheap plastic 4X loupe. This makes a world of difference. It sets you back at maybe $100, but I think it's worth the investment. So light tables are great for judging parts of this piece. The other aspect that Kate also talked about was actually project the pieces. And you need to, if you have electronic files, you want to have projections going with a profiled monitor, a good quality graphics monitor that's been profiled, so you can check the files against what you're seeing on the screen. So this is like a room with two projectors, the lights are off, two different images of a piece. So I'm looking at different things when I project, and Kate sort of talked about this a little bit. Cropping and mounting issues. You're looking on a light box, these things are really small. You project them, they become, these little issues become kind of big issues. And so it's important to project them. Brightness issues, it can help you figure out, okay, do I have to show this piece in a totally black room, or can I have some ambient room? And sometimes the only way to figure out what's going to work is to actually project the piece. You see things a little differently. The one thing about projectors are, they're not great tools for judging color. So, okay, so I have two lenses. They're both the same, 100 to 150 zoom lenses, different manufacturers. You look in the middle of this Kodak lens, it's really yellow. If you project these lenses onto a screen, that's what this is. It's a projector screen, two blank slides, totally different colors, same lamps, same projectors, slightly different lenses. So it's important that you make sure all these things are matched up when you do this, but also recognize there's limitations to this. When you send a piece out to a borrower, you have no idea a lot of times it's hard to control exactly what that equipment is unless you send the equipment with it. So I'm going to give some examples from Catherine's piece of some sort of how we learned some things about this piece through this process. So here you have the film strip, the master, this image, same slide, but different orientation. And this was like, okay, this isn't right. This started a whole dialogue for us. If I flip this slide, you can see we have a big difference in darkness, and they both were sort of like supposed to define the piece, so we're not sure what do we do to move forward because we've never made exhibition copies of this piece yet. So we went through all the slides and noted a couple instances where this was the case and got in contact with the artist, and she fortunately was in New York for a period of time, so she came in. We kind of did that whole process all over again, projected everything, and had a dialogue with her, interviewed her, brought in the curators. We record these interviews and get them transcribed. And in this case, she said, I wanted this, but the lab I was using, they just, they were great in a lot of ways, but they just couldn't get any better than this. But it wasn't what I wanted. It really should look more like this. So from that, we said, okay, we've got to go back and look at the original digital files and kind of adjust those files to make sure that we have what she had wanted. And I think this is like a really common thing with, certainly what I've seen with duping slides, is it's a lot of things are beyond your control, and you're limited by what the lab can do for you. And you end up getting back stuff that's maybe not necessarily what you expected. So it's a common thing that this happens. To keep track of all this, I typically make these bizarre charts where the slide numbers, and then each component has a column, and these are like my internal notes for myself about, okay, these are okay, but this I'm supposed to match the file, don't match the slide because it was wrong. And because when you're dealing with a lot of slides, it gets pretty confusing. The only way to track this is to write it down. The other thing to talk about is when you're looking at what you've got, if you can, try to open your mounts and look and see what kind of film you've got. So you have to be careful doing this. You don't want to touch the film. You use tweezers or gloves or whatever it takes. If you have plastic mounts, it's going to be a lot easier to get them back together. You have paper mounts, you're going to have to cut them open. And that becomes a little more problematic. But I have a little example of where opening up the film was kind of illuminating for us for a piece. This is an installation shot of a piece in our collection by Robert Smithson called Hotel Palenque. This is from 69 to 72. And the piece is basically a lecture that he gave. It's a kind of a really famous piece in our collection. I've got images here. Here we go, slides, we got slides. Let's see if this works. All right, so this is the first image for Hotel Palenque, an actual slide, the first slide. So he was invited to give a speech to architecture students at the University of Utah. They were expecting a formal talk on, Mayan ruins and Palenque, the ruins in Palenque. And Smithson showed up and gave this totally bizarre talk on this Hotel Palenque. And this it's all about entropy, and it was sort of tongue-in-cheek lecture. So it's 31 slides, and we have a computer that runs that audio, and it syncs to the projector so that slides change at different intervals based on his talk. It's a great piece. I would like to play it, but it would take too long for us to do today. This is the original slide in the original mount. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. I didn't know what this format was. I was like, what is this format? I couldn't figure it out. I talked to a lot of people, and I was having a hard time figuring out what this was until we looked at it unmounted, and I remembered this from when I was a kid, 126 format. Instamatic, 126. These are those cartridges. Do you guys remember these? When I was a 5-year-old, I had a little Mickey Mouse one, and his nose was the lens. And you pulled down his ear, and it would take the photo. It was great. So this is an instance where opening them out, we learned a lot about this piece. He actually used one of these cameras. Okay, so digitizing slides. Once you know what you've got, I have to sort of stress how important it is to really look at everything and look at all at the same time to figure out what you've got. Because the next step is to digitize that work. That's the next step for us, at least. And then following that, we'll talk about making exhibition copies, and Doug is going to go into the digitization process and different options for that.
Excuse me. You may wonder, justifiably so, what making albumin prints has to do with digitizing. And I was sort of reminded of that this morning. And the reason that we started making albumin prints 30 years ago was because we wanted to be able to create things for a 20th century audience, so that they could have the same response, the same understanding of that object in front of them that they were looking at that the 19th century audience had when they looked at albumin prints that were brand new and beautiful. And that's what this whole talk is about, what this whole conference is about, how to keep that visceral experience going. We decided to talk a little bit about digitization. That this is not a talk about that, but a sort of a prelude. I suppose it should be another week-long seminar at some point. So I thought we'd just go through a little bit about the hardware that's involved and talk about a couple of other things at the end. So there's a variety of digitizing equipment. Most are scanners of various types. This is a dedicated film scanner. It can scan slides mounted or unmounted. But even if you're scanning them unmounted, since they have to go into a holder, you can't scan to the edge. They can be automated but very risky to automate them with a stack loader because they almost always jam. There's no glass film interface, so there's no problem with Newton's rings. But most of them have, for the kind of purposes that we want to put them to, fairly limited maximum resolutions, around, as I say, 3,000 to 4,000 ppi. Most of the dedicated ones that are still available now tend to be more of consumer quality. And even this Nikon that we have isn't as sharp as we'd like, and as sharp as some of the other scanners. At the other end is a drum scanner, which is literally what it says. You place the film, negative, transparency, or a print onto the drum. I say it must be taped to the drum. That's not quite true. It's usually placed between the drum and a polyester sheet, but there has to be a mounting fluid in there. There are some YouTube videos, instructional videos on how to set that up. They're both fascinating and very scary when you realize that both sides of your original object have been saturated with mounting fluid. Now, there's no anecdotal evidence that I've heard of that that's going to be damaging in and of itself, but it's clear that the conservation community has not endorsed it. The biggest problem probably is damage to the film physically by wiping the fluids off at the end. They're primarily it'll come back to me what the primary component is. And you have to do that to eliminate Newton's rings. The drum scanners are most important when you want really, really big enlargements. They're used mostly commercially when you want to take a 35 millimeter image and make a billboard out of it without upscaling in Photoshop. You can go to image resolutions up to 24,000 ppi, which is probably 4 to 6 times greater than the amount of information that's available even in your best original camera film. It is, however, possible to scan the entire object, not just the image area, because it has to be unmounted. A specific kind of scanner is the Imicon, which is now owned by Hasselblad, the Flex Tight series. Again, slides can be mounted or unmounted, but even the unmounted ones, again, you can't scan to the edge because they have to go into holders that get drawn into the machine. They can, this model can go up to even 5x7 originals. Again, no need for mounting fluid. There's no concern for Newton's rings because there's no glass interface. When the film in its holder goes in, it's forced to go around a curve. And at the apex of that curve is where the scanning takes place, and theoretically that is always exactly in the right spot, so there's never a problem of focus. It tends, because it's on this curve in one direction, it tends to hold films very flat around there, and so it's a very clever and very good idea. Nice thing about them is that they're current. You can buy them now. They get exceptional support. Hasselblad is a fantastic support company. The unfortunate thing about it is they're expensive. This model is $25,000. And then the ubiquitous flatbed scanner, which can come anywhere from, obviously, your $100 all-in-one that you get as a freebie with your computer to a professional level scanner. Slides can be scanned mounted or unmounted because they just go onto the glass surface. There can be a Newton's rings issue because of that. Some of the better scanners come with anti-Newton ring glass. Many scanners you can get anti-Newton ring glass as a replacement glass from a variety of companies. Some models, this one included, the Creo, allow the use of wet mounting fluids if you are so inclined. Maximum resolution up to about, in this case, well, the Creo is about 5,000, 5,500. Some of them claim up to about 6,400 ppi. You can scan all the way to the edge. And interestingly enough, I ran into this in Korea. Here's Getty Images list of approved scanners. This was a few years ago, so they don't have the Hasselblad versions of the Imicon, but only the top-end flatbed scanners will they accept files from, including the IQ Smart 3, which you're seeing here. And then optical capture with a camera. Probably a much better idea for archiving many pieces rather than producing files for duplication and reproduction. Because you can archive very rapidly. You have a photographic camera exposure time rather than a long scanning time. But some of the other concerns that we've been talking about, there's no concern with Newton's rings. You can scan mounted or unmounted. You can capture all the way to the edge. The pixel dimension, the resolution is limited by the pixel dimension of the sensor. And this particular model, oops, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button here, has a 200 megapixel back on it. It is the chip itself isn't 200 megapixels, but it takes multiple images and moves the chip a quarter of a pixel in the back, and then reconstructs the image to give you a unique 200 megapixel image. Some types of scanning backs. Then there's two types of digital backs. Scanning backs, which are indeed exactly what they say. They're little scanners in the back. They are very high resolution, but they tend to be slow, like a scanner. A couple of the better companies, Better Light and Phase 1. And as most cameras are, CCD arrays. Single shot up to about 50 megapixels, like this one is. And multi-shot, when this camera is in its multi-shot mode, up to 200 megapixels. And we're talking about Hasselblad, Sinar, Leaf, Phase 1. One of the real disadvantages of this is you've got to be a really good photographer to use this one. You have to have lots of good photographic experience to be able to set up and maintain a copywork situation with a digital camera that's going to produce files that are the quality that you want for this kind of reproduction. Okay, but it's not all about the hardware. An inexperienced technician can ruin a good scan. It's because the hardware isn't where it's all about. And a great technician can't compensate for inferior equipment. Probably one of the most important things for what we're trying to do here of reproduce existing objects is profiling. Any of these input devices has to be profiled regularly, and it has to be profiled with a profile that was made from a profile target on the same kind of stock as the material that you're going to scan. And I have a slide to show what that means later in just a bit. And of course, if you're in a camera mode, is your illumination even? You have all of those issues. Is it high enough quality to allow accurate profiling and capture? And that becomes an issue because for most of the kinds of work we want to do now, we don't want to use tungsten anymore. It's too hot, too long. But it's continuous tone, so you have no problem with gaps in the frequency range. And it's not all about the stated resolution of your equipment. Most equipment does not perform at the resolution that the manufacturer says it does. And you need to be able to test that. And not only that, but how sharp is the equipment. Because don't forget, there's a lens inside that scanner. And how sharp is that lens? So you should consider investing in a performance analysis software. One example is the Image Science Associates stuff from them in Rochester. Profiling. Take a minute to orient here, but there's two important things that this set of slides shows. One is the importance of profiling, and the other is the limits of profiling. This is an image of a Q60 color input profile, scanned on a Creo IQ Smart 3 scanner. And this bottom one here, the profile target was made on Kodachrome film. And so the profile made from it was, in essence, a Kodachrome profile. It was a Kodachrome profile of that IQ Smart 3 scanner on the day that it was done. And this one up here is on Ektachrome film. The target itself is on Ektachrome film. And theoretically, these two should be identical, because here is a second scan of the target scanned in profile with its Kodachrome profile. And this is the same thing, a second scan of the Ektachrome profile, excuse me, of the Ektachrome target scanned in profile with the Ektachrome-based target. And they're somewhat different, but they're both pretty neutral. This is what happens if you scan a piece of Kodachrome film with a target that was made from an Ektachrome target. It's green. And this is what happens if you scan a piece of Ektachrome film with a target with a profile that was based on a Kodachrome target. Those are bad starting points for trying to make accurate reproductions. These two we can tweak. These two would be pretty hard to. So it shows both the importance of profiling and doing the correct profiling with the correct profile target, but also the limits of that. It's not perfect. This is a bit about why we need to scan outside the mount. Image on the left is the original slide mount, is the original slide in its mount, and the image on the right is a dupe from that, duped optically while the original was still in the mount. And you can see there was registration problems. It doesn't fit. We have this black line around it. We have a little corner crop off. There's a lot of the whole crop on the right side is missing. It's different. So unless you scan out with the slide outside the mount, you can't reproduce it without these kinds of artifacts, unless you're going to enlarge it, enlarge the image somewhat during that process. And then in essence, you must be cropping. You're looking at a lot of color difference here. This one is actually a dupe that's been projected. But it also shows us that we need to be very careful about what we think of as good. Because good here is not a subjective term anymore. It's an objective term. This is good because this is the original. That magenta color is actually in the original slide, even though we might think this one looks more natural. That looks much more like stone.
That's me again. Okay, so we're going to get into talking about creating exhibition copies, but first I have little stories. All right. This is a piece by Sharon Hayes. He just showed another image from her work. In the near future, this is a piece we acquired a couple years ago. It's 13 slide projectors, so it's over 1,000 slides. And we installed this in 2011 in New York. It's a piece, Sharon basically, wait, should I just not use this? Is this better? Yeah. Sharon, let's see. All right, the piece is, she basically held up protest signs in different cities all over the world, sort of, and had friends or bystanders take snapshots of her. So that image where there's really magenta, they're all over the map. You know, you have totally different colors because they're not professional photography. These all get just different timers, but they're not synced together. So we set out to create 6 copies of this work. That's 6,000 slides. And I had like a month to do it. So it's really this incredibly daunting prospect. And it turned out to be way more daunting than I could have imagined. And I'm going to talk about a little story about slide duping. So for years, we all duped slides by bringing a master set or a duplication master set to a photo lab. And they would dupe your slides traditionally through a duplicating machine. And they used 2 films to choose from, either Kodak's eDupe or Fuji CDU film. And these films were totally critical for doing this, for traditional slide duping, for 2 reasons. 1, they have low contrast, and 2, they have very fine grain. So they're able to capture really fine detail, which obviously is important because you have generational loss. They have really low ISO numbers, like 6 ISO. Low contrast is really important because basically all slide film, your normal pictorial slide film that you might use to take snapshots, has contrast built into it already. So your family snapshots were kind of punchy and the colors are strong and they look great because they build in a little contrast into that film. If you were to use that same film, and don't use these films, same slide film to dupe a slide, you're going to add even more contrast into this. And basically you're compressing the darks by doing that, and your darks, you lose detail in your darks and they get sort of muddled. So about 2009, both companies discontinued this film, which is sort of the crisis that we're in now, where this eliminated our ability to dupe sides traditionally. For us, it's no longer available. You can find some of this stuff on eBay, but it's not really a viable option for us anymore. Tina's going to talk a little bit more about that later today. Around 2010, a lot of labs, they all just like threw away their duplicators and stopped offering this service. Sharon and I were setting out to make these 6,000 copies around this time. In late 2010, there were still a few labs in New York that said, yeah, we can do this. And there were labs we'd worked with. So we started this process of making these slides. And we were getting stuff like this back. Really frustrating, really dark. Really contrasty, high contrast images. Sharon was really unhappy, couldn't figure out what was going on. No, wrong one. Here. This needs to get focused. If you're able to focus this at all, they're a little out of focus. This image is actually a dupe from the original with CDU, with this film. So it's slide duplicating film. You can see the difference in contrast. Disregard color, just look at contrast. So and they're both different focal planes, I guess. So this is regular slide film, high contrast, CDU, normal contrast. And this really very accurately represents the piece. It was a great dupe of the original slide. They were both dupes of originals. So we couldn't figure out what was going on, and going kind of out of our minds until finally we opened up the slide mount in frustration and realized, oh my God, they're using RDP, which is Provia, regular slide film. This isn't duping film, and that's why we were getting those other images. This was this totally devastating moment for both of us to realize, like, her whole piece relied on this technology. So it was about this time that we started engaging with Doug and to come up with a way, all right, how are we going to make slides a different way, because this isn't working for us anymore. So he's going to talk about that process. And first he's going to kind of talk about these films and the meaning of this, and then talk about how he makes slides for us.
Yes, I guess it's fair to say, since we're next to the Air and Space Museum, about 2 years ago, Jeffrey called up and said, Housatonic, we have a problem. The film on the left is the Provira film, and I'm using these characteristic curves because I don't want to get Not because I want to get technical, but because it's sort of a graphic way to show just what Jeffrey was been talking about. If you notice on this one, the set of curves, if we start here at this intersection between the curve, the characteristic curve, and a pair of lines where they all cross together, you've got to go up all the way to here before you move over even just over one square. So we're going up 2 full squares and just a little bit more than 1 square. That means it's got higher than normal contrast. The normal is a relative term. That means it's got high contrast. This one, if we start here, we're just beyond the middle of this horizontal line. We come up 1 space, and we're just beyond the middle of the horizontal line. We come up 1 more, and we're just beyond the middle of the horizontal line. That has a contrast of 1. What goes in is what comes out in terms of contrast. Obviously, color and those other issues have to be dealt with, but in terms of contrast, that's built into the film. And the problem is you can't change the contrast. It's built into the film and the processing. The more modern films don't respond hardly at all to changes in processing. Older E6 from the 60s and 70s, you could push it, you could pull it, you could get a different contrast, but they tried to eliminate that for the benefit of professional photographers who aren't doing it to change contrast. They're doing it because they don't have enough light. So that's graphically what we're talking about. So how is it that we can use a pictorial film, a camera film, like this, and make duplicates that respond like this? And the answer turns out to be, or is, with the use of film recorders and a digital intermediate. This is an LVT film recorder. This is what's called a Rhino, obviously. It is one of 3 flavors of film recorders that Kodak and Durst America made over the period in the 80s and 90s. The impetus to design and build these pieces of equipment was promoted by the fact that early in the digital era, designers were working digitally. They were making designs, they were making things for the print world on computers, and the print world couldn't take their files and immediately run them to an offset press and have them look right because color management was not mature enough to do that. Kodak had a brilliant idea for a workaround. They said, well, let's make a machine that we can take that digital file and output it to a piece of Ektachrome film and have that film processed. The designer can hold up the film and say, yes, that looks exactly like I want it to look. He can hand it to the color separator at the offset house, and they say, hey, there's no problem. We've been separating Ektachromes for years. So it was a perfect workaround, even though it was in between these 2 things. So they made three pieces of equipment. This Rhino, it takes 8x10 film. It can expose files up to just a little over 2,000 ppi. Prior to that, they made what was called a 1010 machine, a 1010, so that it could do aerial films. But the 1010 also had ability to expose files that were 3,000 ppi. And they made it a 16x20 machine, which could expose a 1620 sheet of film. And we have one of each. Loading a piece of 8x10 into it. The optics inside. This is the lens that exposes the pixels on it. They're exposed pixel at a time. This is not a CRT that gets imaged with a lens. Each pixel in that file is exposed onto this rotating drum of film as it goes by. This is the focusing tube, because unfortunately, while it's very stable, the depth of field is very short. It can tell whether you have a piece of 7 mil film or 4 mil film on the drum. And the workstation, obviously the computer. What's on here is what's called the dump file. which will become clear in a minute as I go through the calibration process for it, which is really the meat of it, is how we can use a camera film to make duplicates, and an integrated densitometer that tells the computer what's going on or what happened. And the dump file really works like this, and I think it'll if I mention it, it'll clarify the calibration process. When you calibrate it, as will go on, the green line here is the aim set that's been programmed into the software. And the aim set, we have step numbers here down. It's 26 steps, and the software has 26 prescribed voltages that they send to the 3 LED lights to produce the exposure. And we say, well, for the exposure value here at step 3, we want to have an optical density of whatever this is, 2.6, and likewise. So this is our aim set. This is what we're trying to get. The very first time you run a piece of film with what's called an initial, it gives out a prescribed set of 26 values. Always, any initial gets the same set of 26 values, and that's going to tell the machine what's the inherent characteristic of this film. And this is what it is. It's all over the place, and as one could expect, it's a camera film, so it's contrasty. So after we process this film, we read it in with that densitometer, and now the software says, oh, you wanted this, I gave it that value, and we got this. Let's change the output voltage so we can move these lines closer to what you want as an aim. And this is what we get the next time we do it. Very close, but really pretty ragged. The blues off, greens off. And we iterate it again, and they come in a little closer. We iterate it again. And here they're all almost exactly the same shape. They're just a little bit off in color. And iterate it again. And they're virtually right on. In practice, once you get this close, you've got to stop. If you try it again, you'll set the thing in an oscillation and you have to start over again. Well, but this isn't a straight line. And it's not a gamma of, not a contrast of 1. Because what we've been saying is this is what we're looking for. And that's clearly not it. But what we have to remember is we're not going film to film with no intermediary. We're going film to digital file back to film. So here's the output aim density, that same aim set. It's just plotted on a different graph paper. And now I've written out actual pixel values, pixel range of 0 to 255 in any Photoshop file. And here's the input values of a scanned film. Now we have a curve actually that's pretty much the same shape. Got to read it going in a different way. Here's the input optical densities of a piece of color transparency film running from 0 to about 3.25, and my output pixel values ranging from 0 to 2.55. And, well, we'll go back one. Obviously, they were very similar in shape. They're a little offset, but they're similar in shape. And if we plot this actually against the log of it, now we see that they're both straight lines, they're both about the same slope, and they both have the same little hooks on the end. So it actually becomes a very classic tonal reproduction issue, kind of things that you can find in textbooks from the 1920s for tone reproduction. We have an optical density of an original. When you scan it, you get a certain pixel value. When you take that pixel value and output it back with the LVT, you get an optical density that's what you had when you go in. And it was this technology and this ability to go through the digital interface that, when Jeffrey called, gave us the confidence that we could do this. So here's a mock-up. Our files are actually more in focus than that, of the 31 images in Hotel Palenque. Obviously, we can mock them up as basically as a contact sheet. Each file, each image is in a separate layer. So if we need to, we can give individual tweaks to color, contrast, saturation, anything we want in one image and not affect the rest of them. We can add certain kinds of curatorial data, when it was made, its number and stuff, so that at some point in the future somebody opens the slide mount, they find out that realize that they're not dealing with an original, they're dealing with a dupe and where it came from. If need be, we can change the size. This became critical in this particular project. This is the original size, 27 millimeters square. But Jeffrey couldn't find enough 27 millimeter square mounts, so all he could find was 24s. So we had to reduce to 24. Just as an experiment, we also made it to a full 38 millimeter square as a super slide. Are they coming up? Okay. Trying to get the other one up. One of the effects of that, it's a little hard to tell because it's not in focus, but one of the effects of doing that, of course, is now we have an original of a different size. So the I can't see it from over here. So you can see it a little bit, I think. What's supposed to happen is that the one on the left here from the 24 millimeter square, these have been enlarged with the projector to the, with the zoom lens to be about the same size. This one should be slightly dimmer than this one because it's a bigger enlargement ratio in the projection. It's either something you have to compensate for, or if you need it, it's something you could actually use. If you find you need more brightness than your situation allows, you could consider duping to a larger format. You could consider duping in an anamorphic format if you had an anamorphic lens on your projector. If you were in a situation where you couldn't get square on to your projection surface, but the images were supposed to look square, you could keystone the file slightly so that you mounted a keystoned image that would then, but those are all sort of nuances. But there's a very flexible system and doesn't involve a lot of additional steps. It goes directly from the original or whatever the duplication master is through one digital file back to one piece of film. Yeah.
Okay, so we can go back to the PowerPoint.
What happened?
I just did that.
Oh, I see. I forgot there was a...
And I need that. Can I, just go back to the PowerPoint? If you don't already love Maurice, you have to love him for taking your household remote and getting it to program slide machines, a universal remote, so I can change the slide projectors with this thing by hitting DVD. All right. But I'm going to the next slide and I'm not getting anything.
Huh. What am I doing?
Yeah, I'm not getting anything.
There we go.
Ah,
Okay.
okay, good.
Spacebar.
All right,
Spacebar
so,
did it.
Just a little background on this digitization project with him. A little more visual. So this is the original image again, and here's, it needs a little focusing. Okay. So prior to meeting Doug, we had been duping this piece sporadically through the years through optical duping. It's actually, Hotel Palenque is the most requested piece in our collection. So people request to borrow this more than any other piece in our entire collection. We've made over 50 copies of this piece, 50 sets. Sometimes it's out like 3 times at once. But the last couple of years, we were getting these awful slides back. Really high contrast, not great cropping, not a great match to the original. So here's another one. Really dark. I'll go back. All right. One of the advantages of what Doug can do, he's able to put in the accession number, our name, exhibition copy, the date that he made it. I have all sorts of old dupes where it's very hard to figure out what the history of making those were. Here it's written into the file, and you could never mistake what this is. It fits into a mount, gets a cover, and we have a little cute little stamp that says exhibition copy, so it's totally clear when we send these things out what it is. Part of the project with Doug was stockpiling, and Tina's going to talk more about that. So some of these were mounted, and some were left as just full sheets of 8x10 film. When we run out of these, we'll cut these up and reuse these mounts because we can't get them anymore. I pretty much bought out all I could find of 126 mounts. All right, I had some more images, but I'm going to skip that. All right. So once you've made all these things, how many do you make? This is a common question. I've got a 3-month show. How many sets do I need per show? That source for me is Henry Wilhelm's book on color photographs. Chapter 6, he has this fabulous chapter on projector cause fading of color slides. And he kind of calculates the best Fujifilm in the mid-80s, 5.5 hours before fading. But he acknowledges that when you project slides as a viewer and they're sort of gradually changing, your eyes make up those differences. And you can, oh yeah, that's supposed to be white, and your eye makes that up. It's not unless you see an unfaded slide right next to it that you'd realize, okay, there's a difference there. Or if it's something, really burned out. There's actually calculations you can do based on this. You can do a bunch of ugly math to figure out when you need to change your slides. But we just have a rule of thumb where, so a piece that has a 10-second timing for each slide, we need every 4 to 6 weeks. We're pushing now 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks we'll change that set. So for a 3-month show, we need 3 sets. If it's a piece where it's a 1 minute per slide, Hotel Palenque is much longer, around a minute per piece, per slide. We need more sets, so we need every 3 weeks we're going to change that, 4 weeks for a 3-month exhibition. Tate and the Hirshhorn both have these pieces where it's 1 slide, continuous nonstop projection, and I think they both found 1 week per slide, and they got to change them out. So for 3 months, they need at least 12 slides. The other rule of thumb for me is it's better to have more than not enough. Slide jams can ruin a slide. If you're doing an exhibition and something gets ruined, it's always a good idea to have more than you need a little bit. All right, so now I'm going back to slides and some examples of this. This is Sharon's piece again, and I want to go back to get rid of the PowerPoint and go to the second slide projector. This image is an exhibition copy that was projected for 6 weeks. This has been used. It's on E100G film, and nope. Sorry, I skipped these for you guys. Okay, this is unexposed. So it's a slight difference. I think there's some focus needed on this slide. But this is about the point where this could have gone longer, but we said, okay, I think we should pull these now. It's starting to change a little bit. I think you could have gone longer, but that's 6 weeks. This is after 10 weeks. There we go. And this is the same set, same film, unexposed, 10 weeks. This is on, this is E100G. The previous slide I showed you was CDU, Fuji CDU film. Different campaigns of making an exhibition copy. When we sent this out to a borrower, or we said you should change it in 6 weeks, I talked to them. I said, do you want to change them? It's been 6 weeks. They said, oh, you know, they seem fine. I think we'll just leave them in longer. I don't notice any change. They came back, and I was like, well, I think that's kind of burned out. So this whole thing is totally subjective. There isn't really, there's so many variables in determining this, it's very hard to say a hard, fast rule. Whoops. I'm sorry, I'm not totally used to this. All right, then I'm doing this one. This is a piece by Lisa Oppenheim, The Sun is Always Setting Somewhere Else. 8 weeks, no exposure. Some pieces like this where they're sunsets, you know, they're yellow and they're going to fade yellow, they look fine. You really don't really notice much of a change here because of the content of the image. What you do notice, I think you notice, yeah, you see these little black spots in here? One of the bigger issues we have is dust accumulating on slides. So we spend a lot of time actually dusting things so we can have them live a little longer. So now I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. Okay. And you need to get rid of these. And maybe the spinning wheel. Okay. Whoa. Oh man, that hurts. I don't know where it was. Oh God. Applications? No, here I can do this.
Good call.
Okay. Oh man, you guys, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm there. When we send these works out, I don't know why it's doing that. When we send these works out, part of what all this sort of leads to is how long you need to show a piece, cleaning them, all these kinds of things. We send out installation instructions now for pieces, and it's really small, but this is an example of an installation instruction. And this is what I should see, not you. And it's just total meltdown right now. So actually we send out boxes, multiple sets of exhibition copy boxes for a lender, and we put the date on the box, the start date and the end date. We give them dates. You need to change your slides on this date because that's 6 months. And sometimes if we know them, we'll contact them to let them know, okay, it's been 6 months, because back in the day we used to send out, 5 sets of slides for a piece, and they would come back where, yeah, that's it, right? You got to hit that, swap displays, but you can't access it here.
Oh, wait.
There you go. Yeah. So we'd send out all these exhibition copies, and they'd come back, and we found out the borrower had just used one copy the entire time. They never used the other sets, and they were just burned out. So we put in the date here and tell them what to do, basically. It seems ridiculous to have to do this, but we tell them exactly how to load the slides, and the little red dot is useful because we have a number of images where it's not clear. The orientation, it's not totally clear, and pieces have been shown with the slide on its side for many times. I'm not going to talk about storage. We're going to skip that. But there are a couple things that I use that I like a lot. I really like these envelopes from University Products. They have these nice little pockets, and you can put sleeves in. It's good for like smaller groups of slides. They can get bagged and go into cold storage. For things like this, it's great for that. In this case, these are the originals taken out of the original mounts. We use these little mylar sleeves. We put those in, and then the mylar goes into the polyethylene sleeves. If you're going to do this, take out originals from original mounts. I really recommend you document that before you do it. So here's some photographs I took of the piece before they came out, so I know what that cropping is. Because these have changed. We've had to scale them down a little bit because we can't find these mounts anymore. So without this reference, I wouldn't have known what that cropping was. These are nice boxes from University Products. There are six of these little trays. You can store 1,000 box slides in these boxes and then marble seal them and put them in the freezer. Storage, I probably don't have time to talk about storage, but the main thing is hard drives. Talk to your network people. You're going to be getting digital files back from scanning. It's really important that you have a good backup strategy. And that strategy has to include redundancy, so you have multiple drives. You don't just have it on one. You have geographic separation with those drives, so those drives live in different places. Add metadata to your files. I think 10 years from now, someone will look at these scans and they'll have no idea why you scan them or what you use to scan it. A lot of times the scanners don't put in metadata into those files to let you know what that equipment was. So write it in. You can use IPTC, the description field, to type in that kind of stuff. When Doug sends me his files, I put that all in, why we did it, what we did, and exactly what equipment he used. Don't use CDs and DVDs. They're temporary, not long-term storage. And that's it. We want to thank Jeff Martin, Joanna Phillips, and Christina Fronert. Also, Oleg Baburin and Alan Phoenix from Chicago Albumin Works. Thanks to Paul for first telling me to contact Doug. And thanks to Dan Kushel. Everything I really know about slides I learned from Dan. That's all. Thanks.
Good work. So that was a really awesome presentation. Great choreography, guys.
A little technology.